copy of his biography when I put on your chairs. So with no further ado, pop.
Thank you. All right, let's get this going here. Again, I'm Paul Brown. Thanks Roxanne and Jan for organizing and coordinating with me to come here. Also want to thank the people I know that came to support me from HCC and UTD and my wife Cherie. Thank you all. So I'm speaking tonight about Total War and the book I wrote about it called Total War, America's Roadmap to Victory. Before I get into that, I just want to tell you a little bit about who I am. I was in the Marine Corps for 5 years, as Roxanne mentioned. I was a Spanish linguist and an intelligence analyst. I focused mostly on the Middle East, even though I was a Spanish linguist. And I ultimately spent more time in intelligence analysis after I was in the Marine Corps as a civilian contractor. So I've spent a lot of years and a lot of time studying and observing and working in this area and watching the things that we've done right and the things that we've done wrong. Unfortunately, there's more of the latter than the former. But before I dive too deep, I just want to talk about why it is that I do this and that this is an important subject to me. How many of you are veterans? Raise your hand. We got a lot of veterans in here, and I know all of you and the rest of you that are not veterans, you love this country, and you love what it stands for. You love liberty. You love that there are a lot of people in this country that care about liberty, and many of you have fought and bled for that liberty. I see that as a sacrifice. It's a sacrifice that we've all made and that many have made before us, and I'm passionate about making sure that that sacrifice is not in vain. I do not want us to, for no reason, willy-nilly go into a conflict or any other endeavor when we shouldn't and just come out of it defeated. I don't want to ever see that happen again, but unfortunately it's been happening nonstop for about the last 70 years. So, what is total war? For those of you that do not know, it's as it's described, as the name kind of describes it. It's putting all your effort into a military conflict with the objective of winning. So you don't leave any options off the table if it's what it takes to win. What we've been fighting for the last 70 years could be described as limited war. Before that, the last total war we fought was World War II. And that was a complete total war in that it involved our industrialized capacity and our combat capacity. So companies and factories were converted to build tanks and aircraft and bombs and firearms. People were put on rations for food and so on. And then the combat side, of course, was that we would do anything it took. That meant bombing whole cities, bombing civilians. It meant sinking any enemy ships, whether they had combatants on them or not, in order to win the conflict. So that's a huge shift from what we all expect from war today. After World War II, as a lot of you know, we faced a large existential threat against our own security, and that was communism. Furthermore, the communists, the USSR, had nuclear weapons, which was dangerous for us, and so the thought at the time was that you cannot go head-to-head in a total war anymore with anyone that represents the other side. And so as we saw in the Korean War, we were afraid to go all the way to do everything we needed to do to achieve victory, because we were afraid if we went too far that it would escalate. We would see increased Chinese involvement, potentially increased Russian involvement, which would have been bad for us. And we were genuinely concerned about a catastrophic nuclear holocaust, if you will. And there was some merit in that concern. One can opine one way or the other. Looking back, they say hindsight is 20/20. I personally don't think we should have stopped in North Korea when we were fighting the Korean War. I think we should have gone into China, because I think they also feared nuclear war. I don't think the Chinese didn't have the ability, but I don't think Russia would have started a nuclear war over it. But all that to say, that's what shaped our policy from that moment forward. We went into Vietnam with the same sort of concept that we have to hedge ourselves, that we can't get too involved, but we still got involved. When we went into Vietnam, and I'm going to draw a lot of parallels to Vietnam and the current conflicts, or the most recent conflicts in which we've been involved, we set a schedule. We said when the war really kicked off, we said this is going to be an 8-week conflict. The problem with that, when you schedule a war like that, you need to remember to send a copy of the schedule to the enemy. No one did that, unfortunately, and it lasted much longer, as you all know. So before I get too bogged down on the history part, just suffice it to say that we did the same thing in Korea and Vietnam and Iraq and Somalia and Iraq again and Afghanistan, is we limit ourselves, and this is a problem for 2 major reasons. The first and most obvious is that it's harder to win. The closest thing we've had to a win in the last 70 years in a major conflict was Operation Desert Storm, the Gulf War. We did win that. It was a decisive victory, but we didn't really close it. As soon as we achieved our minimum objective of getting the Iraqi military out of Kuwait, we said, okay, we're done. We chased them out. We did a little bit more killing before we left, but basically that was it. We left the same regime in power. We let them build up their forces, and ultimately, if you wanted to perfect that conflict, you can argue about whether we should have gone in or not, but since we did go in, to perfect that, you need to punish any enemy that is willing to go to war with you. And that sounds callous, and I'll probably repeat this several times, but war is a dirty, violent endeavor. And we have a tendency to romanticize it, or to clean it up, or to look at it in a way that we see our righteous intent and believe that means we're not doing anything dirty or unclean in it. But ultimately, every war will involve civilian casualties, and it will involve acts that someone has to make the decision, I'm willing to commit this very terrible violence to achieve this objective. Okay, so outside of Desert Storm, and really including Desert Storm, we haven't gone all the way. And so the second thing is, I mentioned winning is going to be more likely if you're able to commit totally. The second thing is you're less likely to go to war if you're honest about what it takes to win. So one thing I mentioned in my book is, if you believe that you can send men to fight and kill in another country without suffering casualties and without killing civilians, then you are lying to yourself. And that's what we do. We trump up the idea of limited war, and we talk about surgical attacks and special operations forces and laser-guided missiles, and we ultimately sell to the public this idea that we're going to be able to kill all the right bad guys in all the right places at all the right times with minimum civilian casualties, and it'll just end. So the public is more willing to buy it. A lot of people would argue, if we had been honest about what it would have taken to win Vietnam, that we would not have gone into Vietnam. A lot of people argue that if we had been honest about what it would have taken to win in Iraq, we would not have gone into Iraq on the second occasion. And I'm going to talk a lot about Iraq tonight for obvious reasons. There's a lot going on with that. I believe if we would be more honest with ourselves about what it will take to win in Iraq now, it would be a very different conversation. And this is before we even get to the conversation about whether or not it's worthwhile to go in the first place. But you can't have that conversation honestly until you really talk about what it will take to win. So, also, anytime if anyone has any questions, feel free to jump in. I don't want to be too formal, but if you don't, I'll just keep going. So, regarding Iraq, there's some big things about this that, I think are just too obvious not to talk about. We invaded in 1991. We invaded in 2003. So 12 years. It's another 12 years. We're on track to invade Iraq every 12 years. And that's, I think, if anything could be indicative of a major problem, it is that. When you have to, they say doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results is the definition of insanity. So are we insane, or is there something else? I think we're insane. I think there are a lot of reasons why we do this, but the best explanation I have is policymakers are elected, right? So their goal, they have a couple goals, but one of their major goals is to be reelected. So the decisions they make are based very heavily on public opinion. If I do this, are the voters going to reelect me? So to some extent, public opinion does matter with this, which is also a problem because the public gets its information primarily from 30-second sound bites on the news. What do the majority of people know about Iraq? What do the majority of people know about the Islamic State? Very, very, very little. They don't know the history of it. Some huge percentage, I should have written down the statistics in my notes, of people can't find Iraq on a map, or Afghanistan. We're talking about the bare minimum knowledge required to make geopolitical decisions regarding war and economics and foreign policy. All right? Without that, how can we expect the American people to know the history of Iraq and the difference between Shia and Sunni Muslims and the difference between the different groups and how Iran plays into it and how Pakistan has been used as a safe haven for the Taliban and how Iran has been used as a safe haven for Jaish al-Mahdi or the Mahdi army in Iraq. You can't. It would be foolish. So policymakers are making decisions based off of the public, which is based off of 30-second sound bites that are put there in order to tell a story that will sell. Part of it, there are agendas and everything, but a lot of you probably know the old adage, why do newspapers exist? To sell newspapers. And it's true. Whatever they got to say, and if they can push a war to happen, well, they're going to sell a lot more newspapers. And they're going to, and ABC and NBC and CBS and CNN are all going to get a lot more people watching, and they're going to be really interested, and everyone's going to be really excited about another expected U.S. victory, which is what we expect every time we go to war, by the way. The beginning spirits are very high because we always look at we match up the U.S. firepower to whatever the enemy's firepower is. Unequivocally, the U.S. has the best training, the most funding, the best equipment, and it's a very large military. We're the third most populous nation in the world, and our military probably has more experience in the last 70 years than any other military in the world. Military to military, no one comes close to matching up with us, and that's why when we go into these conflicts, it seems like a no-brainer. There's absolutely no way the enemy could win. But it all comes down to our intent. It all comes down to our objectives and how much we're willing to commit. And so let me get a little bit more into that. Korea, for a large-scale war, was probably one of the least limited of the fights we fought. We did go into North Korea, and we did use the same types of tactics and techniques that we used in World War II. And really our biggest limitation in North Korea was geographical, since we were unwilling to go into China. We were unwilling to take the fight to China, and when you're unable to attack the enemy at home, unable to attack the enemy's supply line, attack the enemy's source for munitions and funds and food and personnel, you can't win. And I wouldn't say we learned the same lesson over and over, but we experienced the same lesson over and over. In Vietnam, and it's uncanny how similar Vietnam is to Afghanistan in the way we have run it. Because of diplomatic policy, we limited ourselves geographically to not going into Laos or Cambodia. And the Viet Cong, the North Vietnamese army, used Laos and Cambodia for massive supply lines. They had bases set up all along the border of Vietnam from which they would attack into Vietnam. They would do night raids in Vietnam and go right back over into Cambodia and Laos. And while for large portions of the war we did run limited special operations in Laos and Cambodia, and we did run special air assaults, we didn't ever attack in a meaningful way until the very end when it was too late, and we didn't go far enough at that point. But the similarity there is in Afghanistan, the Taliban used Pakistan as a safe haven. They used it for transporting troops, they used it for resting, they used it to get funding, and we just ignored that. And for some reason, we think it's acceptable. We place limits on ourselves because we think we can overcome that, which is hubris. The fact of the matter is, despite having the greatest military in the world, fighting another human being is a dangerous endeavor, especially when he has the will to do whatever it takes to win. And to illustrate that, another point I make in my book, imagine you have two men, okay? One is 6'2", 225 pounds, and he's in great shape, and he knows how to fight, and he's got experience fighting. And you've got another guy, he's 5'6", we'll say 140, he's scrawny, and he has some experience too, but clearly no match for the 6'2", 225-pound man. But the big guy, he has a soft heart. He doesn't want to hurt anyone, he doesn't want to go too far. He does have a noble reason for fighting, protecting his family or protecting himself. But he goes into a fight with the smaller man, and he's unwilling to hit the other man in the face or the head or the neck, or even anywhere on the body, only the extremities, because it's only the other man's hands and feet that are attacking him. So he'll only attack the little man's hands and feet. He'll only punch there, while the little man is literally trying to kill the bigger man. Now, the big man might survive the fight. He might come out of it beaten and bruised, maybe alive. Maybe he won't. Maybe he will be killed. But after one or two such fights, he's going to realize that you can't fight like that. If you're going to win, if you have a determined opponent, especially one who's determined to kill you or to do anything or everything else that it will take to win, you have to match that same level of aggression. And that's where we've been lacking for a long time. So I want to go through some numbers here. A lot of people don't have a great understanding of what the sheer extent to which we went to win in World War II. And before I get into this, I have to be honest that it is a difficult subject. What I'm talking about specifically is willingness to, on a large scale, attack civilian populations with the purpose of killing them in order to win a conflict. The reason it is so, and I re-emphasize this, is that without being honest about that, without being honest that that is what it takes to win many conflicts, not necessarily all, but many conflicts, we will continue to go to war without winning. We'll continue to have veterans like myself and the other veterans I know, the other veterans here, sacrifice their sweat and blood and time and the lives of their friends and family for no reason. In World War II, the U.S. lost, let's see, where is that here? 416,800 troops. The UK lost 383,000. The Soviet Union lost 8.8 to 10.7 million, plus about 15 million civilians. China lost 20 to 50 million people, which was due to both Japanese and other internal struggles. And when we were attacking German troops in France, Allied bombings alone killed over 67,000 French people. To attack our enemy, us and our British allies killed over 67,000 of another set of our allies to win. Now, we haven't had the kinds of opponents in the last 70 years that would match the same kind of numbers and the same kind of catastrophic deaths and injuries that we saw in World War II. But we have seen enemies that have required a total war rather than a limited war. Of course, one thing I do mention in my book is there is a time for limited war. I'm not endorsing one tool for your toolbox. Grenada was a great example of a limited war. Iraq, the first time we went in, the Persian Gulf, could have been limited, but not to the extent that it was limited in the way it was cut short. The goal is to win. The goal is not to destroy an entire people. And that's it's important for us to remember that as Americans, we do love freedom, we do love liberty, and that's I think it's so well illustrated in the way we handled Germany and Japan. We did everything we could to win, and then as soon as it was over, we helped bring those countries back to life. Now that isn't a good option in every situation. We focus on nation building in Iraq and Afghanistan. No one has any business doing that there, not us. Ultimately, when we went into Japan and Germany, they had cultures and infrastructures that were previously already to the point of being very successful and very productive and very organized, and interestingly enough, much more in sync with being able to work with American culture than some others. But Iraq and Afghanistan do not possess the cultural compatibility with the United States that we would need to go and set up governments, especially setting up governments. Democracy is not the right answer for Iraq and Afghanistan, at least at this time. If it is, it's for them to set up. It's not for us to set up. So getting more into Iraq now, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with what's going on there. The Islamic State has taken over an area about the size of Belgium. An estimated 8 million people live in the area in which they control. They have an estimated 20 to 30,000 fighters from over 90 countries, including many Western countries. There are an estimated 150 U.S. persons fighting with the Islamic State right now. There are Brits, there are Belgians, there are French, there are Germans, there are Spaniards, they're from all over. And they do present a genuine threat both to the region and to international stability, especially with their ability, with their passports to travel. They can't, it's different than the Al-Qaeda we fought, or a lot of the other groups, the Taliban, obviously, in that you have fighters from all over the world who have a lot of experience, they have a lot of training, and in many cases, they will fit back into their cultures back home very, very well. I'm not saying all this to fearmonger, because the question still remains, is it worthwhile for us to go in? So, looking back at what we've done in the past, and further in the past and what it would take to win, I believe it would take no less than a large-scale invasion in which we would have to be willing to commit large-scale attacks within the region that would lead to the deaths of the foreign fighters and the local populations, which would even cause it to flare up worse, in which case you're talking about a larger commitment. So one interesting number, a lot of you may remember the surge in 2007 in Iraq. We got up to about 166,000 troops in Iraq. Now, war, some people call war a science. It's somewhere between an art and a science. We have The Art of War by Sun Tzu, but a lot of experts accept the number that you need one soldier for every 50 civilians in order to effectively fight an insurgency. So we had 166,000 people in Iraq, and by their population, we would need around 660,000 to reach that 1 in 20. And that's before you even consider the kind of tactics and strategy and techniques you would actually need to be effective. So we didn't even reach the bare minimum, which is the right staffing for the region, much less doing what we would take to win. The same thing in Afghanistan. It was around 585,000 or so that would have been required for us to, 568,000 for us to have the required staffing that one would think you would have in order to beat an insurgency. And at most we ever had 100,000 in 2010. So our commitments there have never actually been full. And I talked a little about the politicians. There's also a problem with the generals, who you could say to some extent are politicians. Not all of them, and I'm not calling anyone out, but a lot of our generals, when they get to a certain level, before they even get to the general level, are playing politics. They know what it takes to get promoted. You know, ultimately, you're getting promoted by Washington. Below a certain level, none of that even comes up to the attention of Washington. It's a lot. There's still lower level politics, but you don't have to demonstrate that you're willing to do whatever the president says without questioning, without hesitating, and to agree with it and totally back it up. So our generals are well educated. They have a lot of experience. They've lived through Vietnam. I don't think any of our generals, or current generals, were not alive in Vietnam, and many of them were in the military. And then they saw Vietnam, they saw Somalia, they saw Iraq. They've experienced Iraq and Afghanistan for the last 10 years. They know the answer. So at this point, any general who just goes along with the president's recommendations, and instead of doing the right thing and refusing, saying, I will step down, or we can change this plan, they just go with it because it's the next career step. They've already done all the right things and made all the compromises they needed to get there in the first place. Why wouldn't they make more compromises at that point? So that's a major problem as well. Are there any questions at this point? Yes.
How big an issue? We have not formally declared a war since World War II.
I'm glad you bring that up. Actually, I had those in my notes. Yeah, the last time we declared war was in 1942 during World War II against some of the smaller nations around Germany. And we haven't declared war since then. That is a major issue. The politicians don't want to take blame for things. If it doesn't go wrong, part of our limited commitment that we've seen militarily has also been a limited commitment politically. And so when you're unwilling to declare war is what it is. War is a dirty word, though, in politics. And if you speak about war honestly, people think you're a warmonger, you're a hawk. You're pushing for violence that is unnecessary. This can be won without too much bloodshed. And so, yeah, we haven't declared war since then. And that also reminds me, back on the political side of things, part of our problem is allowing politics into war in the first place. The president should not be directing a war. The president and Congress should declare war and then tell the generals to take care of it. And that's ultimately what I believe the generals need to demand or resign. And if they're not demanding, if they demand that and they don't get it, they need to say, well, sir, you're not qualified to run a war, and I am unwilling to run a war based on your lack of qualification, so I'm out. Yeah. Maybe hundreds of generals would quit and it wouldn't change anything. Or maybe it would. Maybe the American people would stop and say, what is going on? And maybe we should think twice about going to this conflict, or maybe we should change the way we do it. Other questions? Yes?
I don't recall the time frame, but it made some noise on the news. But how much effect has the dismissal of a lot of the top-ranking armed force people, what, what kind of problems has that caused, or is it going to cause? And how many of them were there?
It's always going to cause some problems when you have change of staffing and personnel, and a lot of it, like I mentioned, not all the generals are bad. Some of them do have issues of conscience, and they either decide to resign or they're asked to resign. And so that's part of it. And when you see a cadre of generals who are more willing to play ball politically, that is to work with the politicians to do whatever they want, and instead of doing the right thing, then that is detrimental to the entire military, because it's the top-down leadership. They'll push that down on their commanders and on their commanders and on the rest of the troops until you have really a weaker military.
But do you think that in light of what you just said, that the majority of them did not like what Obama was trying to do and wanted to do?
Honestly, I couldn't say. I believe that could be the case. Maybe the majority of them didn't like, or maybe they did. But unfortunately, I don't know enough about that specific issue to say one way or the other. Sometimes you just got to clean house, and sometimes it's legitimate, and sometimes it's not. From this perspective, it can be very difficult to tell what all the exact political motivations are of the decision makers at those levels. Yes.
Quick illustration of what you're talking about. When combat engineers, the Army combat engineers, go in, whether it's out there as patrol for IEDs or it's breaching the minefield, they're paired up with infantry units. And, that's when they say, hey, our infantry units are the best in the world. They are the best. But if we have our choice, we'd rather go in with Polish infantry units because they don't worry about rules of engagement. They just take out anything that's unfriendly. Our guys, our infantry units are so hamstrung by the rules of engagement, they get killed.
Yeah, that is a big issue. Ultimately, it doesn't matter how big your gun is if you don't know how to use it, or if you can't use it, or if you refuse to use it, etc. And I've heard similar stories, not specifically with the Polish, but other units, that their goal when they're outside the wire is to come back alive and to commit as much damage as possible to anyone who gets in their way. I was in the Marine Corps for 5 years, so I got a special place in my heart for Marine Special Operations Command, MARSOC, and those guys got booted out of Afghanistan several times for basically engaging too hard. And they're Marines. They know the job of war is to win a war and to fight hard. But the culture of the entire military is changing. And a lot of you know this already. There is a tendency among veterans to always think the new military is just going to pot. So I try to adjust my belief for that bias. I know, when I was in the Marine Corps, we always used to joke, there's this mountain called the Reaper that we had to hike in boot camp. And we always had rumors of the new guys coming out that they didn't have to climb the Reaper anymore. So you go up to some new private and you're like, so did they cancel the Reaper? Like, no. Like, oh, I thought they did. Nope. Oh, okay. You're still a boot. So I have to adjust for that bias. But I have heard of a lot of substantive changes in the military that degrade our ability to fight wars. This is a micro example, but in the Marine Corps, in boot camp, one of the things that they used to do, and this is a real one that I have confirmed, not one of those made-up rumors, that we used to say kill as a response. The psychology of humanity is such that humans do not naturally want to kill, and that's a good thing. But to have an effective fighting force, your infantry, your riflemen, any of your combat arms need to be willing to kill the enemy when they are ordered to do so. So part of the psychology of breaking down that stigma or breaking down that psychological bar to killing is we would use kill as a response. They would say do something, everyone would yell kill. And that sounds harsh to a civilian population, as it should. It is harsh because it's a part of warfare. It's the training part, but they removed that because they don't want Marines to be mean. They have to be mean, you know. So now they say drill instead of kill, and that's a micro example. Yes.
So, from an applications perspective, based on everything that you've said, I don't know if you're at this point or planning on going into it, but what do you recommend that we do going forward where we're at, based on where we're at right now?
That's a great question for my wife, Sheree. Thank you. She's always looking out for me. So, yeah, she's got to narrow this down. First, we have to put total war back on the table as an option. That's the simplest step. Just put it out there as an option. At this point, it's not even an option. Okay, it would be political suicide for many of the lawmakers to even suggest a real true definition of total war. What you see right now is there are some conservatives that want to take some restrictions off of the authorization for use of military force in Iraq that President Obama just recommended to them. But you're not seeing that take off all the gloves that there should be. You're not seeing quite the level of total war that we would need in order to win. The second thing is education, or it could be the first thing, could be the second thing. All of these are important, but we need to educate ourselves and the American people on what it is to fight a war and what must be done to win a war. From a practical level, I don't see being able to influence our education system so that they teach this in schools. That's just not going to happen. But culturally, just getting that message out there, talking and engaging with people logically. My goal right now with this book and this general message is I want to get this message out there because I'm tired of going to wars and losing. So I see it as incumbent on all of us, veterans and family and friends of those who served and those who understand warfare and understand the military, to talk with people we know about it, because we're the ones who ultimately influence what happens. It shouldn't be that way as far as who's running the war. It should not be politicians running the war, but it is. So if all of us are pushing and voting a certain way, then that can change that eventually. And actually, to that end, I sent an email to Jan and Roxanne with a form letter you can send to your representative about how we should be fighting war, especially upcoming for this new conflict in Iraq. Yes?
What about the impact of women on total war?
That's like women in the military? That's a great question. So I've known a lot of women in the military that I really got along with, and I worked well with and did an excellent job. And I'm not opposed to having women in the military. I am very opposed to putting women in combat arms. And from one perspective, I would be... The problem is, when you make the objective to put women in combat arms no matter what, you always start with the idea, well, we're not going to change the standards. But when you look at things like the Marine Infantry Officer course, I know several dozen women have gone through it already and have not completed it because of injury. I believe one woman completed it, but at the end of it, she was so badly injured that she either had to get out of the Marine Corps or I forget exactly what happened with her, but all of the women that have gone through that have been too injured to continue. And that's a major problem. And we're talking about Marine Corps officers. That's a very small cadre of the entire fighting force, but a very important part of it. And when you're talking about taking someone that you have put all the way through, you've vetted and you've recruited and you put them through Marine Officer Candidate School, and in the basic school, so Officer Candidate School is around 3 months, the basic school is another 9 months, and then you send them to the Officer Infantry course, and now they're broken and they can't work for the Marine Corps anymore. So simply from a pipeline perspective, it's not logical, it's not conducive, and most women in the military don't want to go to combat arms. I know there are exceptions, but the bigger issue is if then you do lower the standards, now you're degrading the fighting ability of those units that they go into. And a lot of people talk about the whole, men won't be able to focus, or men something will happen and they'll go after the woman first. Maybe that would be true in some cases. I don't personally buy that. For me, it's just a simple issue of degrading your fighting ability because you have people that are less physically capable in that job. And combat is an exhausting business. It's very tough on your body, and most male infantrymen and special operators and so on get out with lifelong injuries. I wasn't even in the infantry. I was a Marine, but I wasn't an infantryman, and I have hip problems and back problems, and that's an anecdote, but the point is it's hard on the body, and that makes it much harder to perform in combat. I want to win wars. Any other questions? Yes?
Well, as far as ISIS is concerned right now, I'd say turn Jordan and Israel loose and say, you go do what you have to do to get rid of them. Us just talking about it is not going to get rid of them and keep them from, cutting people's heads off and burning people alive.
That's true. And you know what? Jordan may just go do that. As of last night, a large contingent of Jordanian forces had massed on the Iraqi border. Now, this is an educated guess, but I give it about 99.9% chance that they invade. That's the first step, is massing on someone's border. They're mad. They're genuinely angry. Their king is genuinely angry. He has the public support, and this is an opportunity for Jordan to step up in the world community as well. I see it almost as a win-win for Jordan in their incentive for going in. So I believe Jordan will go in. The question is, what will we do? Will we do anything? And if so, to what extent? Yes?
The concept of Jordan going in, I think if you're very incensed about what's happened with the killings and how brutal it's been with these people very recently, and you think, well, good, Jordan should go in. But when you look strategically at the size of their military and their capacity from kind of a long-term perspective, is it feasible? Can they do it on their own? What is them doing on their own defined as? Are they going to need support? How would that have to work?
It depends. The Jordanian military is very capable, and they have very capable special operations forces and infantry and air force. And I believe they are capable of defeating the Islamic State, but you add some complications in that they are local. So anything they do to the local population, the local population can reach them. So you're looking at the possibility, if Jordan gets very involved in a meaningful way, that they're actually able to attack the Islamic State and stop them. It might turn into a full-blown war between the state of Iraq and Jordan, which would be very complex, but then you also risk the possibility of other nations getting involved. There's already a very strong Sunni-Shia fight and polarization going on. The more actors that enter, the more the other actors on the other side will want to enter to protect their interests. So that's kind of you don't know how that will end up. But one concern of mine is that if we do get involved in a limited capacity and Jordan does go in, is that we will set the tone for the fight. The United States is still a world leader, especially militarily, and other militaries take our lead. So if Jordan had the intent to go in full bore, do everything they had to do to win, if we come in but again in a limited capacity, they might scale it back, and then we could take a situation that may have resolved itself and make it worse.
What would you like to see with the U.S. military right now mean, I look at it, sure they've got boots to the ground, to some degree advisors. I could see ground forces in Iraqi Kurdistan setting up air bases, which should have been set up before, and they should never have left. I see supporting the Jordanian troops if they're gonna go in, the eyes in the ground, and just full force support. But what do you see as the ultimate solution? I don't think we're gonna ever see 100,000 Americans in combat in Iraq, but what would be ideal if you had to say allocate 20,000?
Ultimately, I just don't see it as ideal to send 20,000 because then we slowly ratchet up our involvement, just like in Vietnam. We slowly ratcheted up our involvement in Vietnam because you get pulled in. It's the nature of war. The more of our people get killed, the more we have to shift what we're doing and increase what we're doing, and the American people get mad, rightfully so. When American troops get killed, the American people get mad. And we should get mad, but our reaction is wrong. Our reaction should always be to what is our strategic advantage. You know, what is our objective? What are we willing to do to reach that objective? And if we're not willing to do honestly, being honest with ourselves, what it takes to reach that objective, then we're out. And that's hard to deal with. I don't like the Islamic State. I would love to see them completely wiped off the face of the planet. I think it would be good for us. I think it would be good for the whole region. But you're beyond the complications of, well, you know, then someone else takes their place, and someone else takes their place, and someone else takes their place, is the issue that if we're not committed to winning, we will lose. That it's almost a scientific fact, you know. So if we send in 20,000, that's the wrong number. If we wanted to win, it would have to be a full-scale invasion, ballpark 500,000 troops, and that's not going to happen. You know, that is the political reality. I know that will not happen because the American people wouldn't go for it, the politicians wouldn't go for it, and it wouldn't really matter what the generals thought, one way or the other. Yes.
It was 3 years, 8 months, and 1 week from Pearl Harbor to VJ Day. It was roughly just a little over 4 years from Fort Sumter to Appomattox. Is it a whole lot better to go all out for a shorter period of time than a dripping engagement like Vietnam and like the war in terror?
I agree with that completely. That's an excellent point. And we make excuses since oftentimes we are not educated about why we're losing these things. Is we do make excuses. Oh, it's complicated in Iraq and Afghanistan. You have insurgency, and it was complicated in Vietnam. You have insurgency and you have jungle warfare. Fighting Japan in the Pacific was not easy. It was not. It was not any easier than fighting Vietnam. It was not any easier than fighting Iraq and Japan. Same thing for Germany. In fact, I would make the argument that it was far, far more difficult. But we allocated far greater resources to the problem, and we had far greater will to win, as evidenced by our bombings of civilian populations in Japan and Germany. Some numbers I didn't mention there. We destroyed about 43% of the 66 largest cities in Japan in World War II. 43% of the 66 largest cities. We killed an estimated 1.3 million Japanese people in those bombings and injured an estimated 900,000. We killed an estimated 600,000 Germans in bombing of Germany, bombing civilians and cities, including 80,000 children. We know that about 80,000 of the Germans we killed in Germany were children. That's terrible. That's the cost of war. And so if you leave here remembering anything, War is violent and deadly and terrible. And it is a horrible price to pay for an objective. So if you're going after, if there's an objective for which you're willing to go to war, make sure it is worth it. So that's the first thing. The second thing is put total war back on the table. The third thing is educate others, reach out to your representatives. I've enjoyed speaking here a lot, and if any of you know of other places where I can speak, or if you have contacts with a newspaper or TV or radio station, I want to get this message out there, and I think it's an important one for our country. I'm not so naive as to say that I believe I will be able to change the country with this message, because there are a lot of people that talk common sense all the time, and people aren't willing to listen. But my belief is that I would be remiss if I did not try. It is my duty to try. Yes, sir.
Talk to me a couple minutes about the Korean conflict. I had a brother-in-law that was over there in 1950, and there were Chinese, we were fighting Chinese, and we were fighting Russians. And I understand why we didn't want to go on, push it on through North Korea and get into China or get into Russia. But they had soldiers in there fighting us.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes, I do. Russia provided material support, and China provided material and personnel support to the North Korean military. And ultimately, it came down to, when you play chicken or you got two cars going towards each other, it comes down to who blinks first. And we blinked first. We were more afraid of them nuking us than they were of us nuking them. And the part of the thought process on that is, well, we were closer to their home territory. There is some logic in it. I like to be honest where honesty is due. Just because the other side is wrong doesn't mean there's not some logic in it sometimes. If China was fighting a war in Baja California, we would be pretty scared and pretty close to the edge and willing to do some crazy stuff. I think they would be right to be concerned about us nuking them if they crossed a certain line. If they went up from Baja California into California with Russian troops or Chinese troops, forget about it. It's a bad idea. I do believe it was a miscalculation on our part, though. I don't think China or Russia, I don't think the whole communist movement was willing to collapse and end the world in a nuclear war because of North Korea. It wasn't that important to them. That's my 2 cents on that. Yes.
Okay, I won't ask any more questions,
Okay.
but
One more question.
One more question.
I'll give it up.
Yeah. She can ask me later since she's my wife.
On the way home,
Yes, sir.
Going back to history,
Yes.
your opinion, do you personally think the war in Vietnam would have escalated had not President Kennedy been assassinated? Right.
That's a good question. That is a good question. I really don't know. I can't answer that.
He signed an executive order to pull out.
Yeah.
He had a Republican, I can't remember his name, do a study.
Yeah.
Because he initially got elected saying he would, and he didn't want to appear as soft.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. So, all right. Well, I think my time here is done. Thank you all so much for listening.
Great program, and as a Vietnam veteran, I could talk for an hour about this stuff. The only thought I have is, well, I have several thoughts, but the only one I'm going to mention is the main difference between Vietnam and Afghanistan is, with Afghanistan, you didn't have a sizable part of the American population actively rooting and demonstrating for the other side. And I and many thousands of others will never, ever get over that. We'll never fully trust the public again. Okay? All right. I'm sorry if you don't like that, but that's the way it is. As that military and geopolitical